Holodeck 3 program is reinstated.
Open sesame!
Commander Klingon vessel. We are energizing transporter beam. Now.
Warp 1, engage!
All right, hello, welcome everyone to Star Trek from the Holodeck. You can find this show wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search From the Holodeck. And our preferred podcast providers are iTunes and Spotify. Just search From the Holodeck. Be sure to give us a 5-star rating and a review. We do need those. Hello, David. How are you?
How's it going, everybody?
All right. You're on the bridge, correct?
Yes, I am.
Everything functioning correctly?
I'm not partying with the lower deckers down below.
Okay, good. All right, so today we're going to be talking about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, episode titled Lost in Translation, which is the 6th episode of the 2nd season. David, before we get into this episode, I do want to say that if I were to cosplay, because I'm not a cosplayer, but if I were to be a cosplay, my very first cosplay would be Zombie Himmer.
Yeah, dude, I love those scenes. And especially since I am thankful that we got kind of like some resolution with Hemmer, because I'm sorry, from season 1 he's one of the standouts of that season.
Yeah, it was a shame. His death served a greater purpose.
Oh yeah.
But at the same time, it was such a loss because I feel like they could have done a whole lot more with that character,
especially when you have the training videos of him.
Yeah.
Like, I forgot why I loved Hemmer so much.
Yeah, but listen, like I always say, if you're going to kill a character, make sure it matters, and it does matter for a story, for story aspects. Specifically, look at how they used it in this episode. They used it as motivation for Uhura, which is what it did last season as well. So if you're going to kill a character, make sure it really matters for the progress of the overall story as well as character development.
Well, even more so because like Uhura, the relationship between Uhura and Hemmer was the mentor. So it's kind of like at season 1, yeah, we kind of got some resolution, but this episode is the one that I feel that we finally get resolution of that relationship of Uhura's, where we get to actually see the effects of a death of a character. You know, getting a little snippet in the end of the episode is great, but I appreciate it more when that character's death comes back and plays more of a role front and center.
I agree. If anyone out there ever spots a Zombie Hemmer cosplay, please snap a photo and send it to me. I will pay that person $100. No, not really. But I do want some photos, please.
Watch, now your mailbox is going to be flooded with like a bunch of things.
All right, David. So overall, this is a very strong episode for numerous reasons. It shifts, rearranges, fleshes out, and brings together various significant aspects, plot aspects from previous episodes, while also working on building out Uhura as a character and dropping, I guess you can say, dropping narrative migratory cues in connection to Kirk and his imminent importance to the future of the Enterprise, his relationships with future crew, and giving us time with the actual Prime Universe Kirk. And in doing so, we saw attributes of Kirk that we are familiar with, but it also gave us a deeper look into his private sphere. And that was one of the standout moments. And we're going to break down a lot of that in just a moment. Also, the theme of the episode was 100% classic Trek, at least when taking into account the ideological trappings that are often embedded in the so-called more authentic or traditional Trek narratives. In a Trek book that I'm reading, or that I have read, I should say, that I actually keep it right next to me when I do write-ups on notes and discussion posts, because it has a lot of information. It's a wealth of information. It's called Return to Tomorrow, which deals with the making of the motion picture. And it explicitly states that a core tenet of Trek is that the solution to a perceived threat is not to extol violence with your opponent. One of the most prized elements of Star Trek was the tendency for antagonists to be misunderstood as opposed to being malicious. So the key idea here is communication. That's why the season finale of Star Trek Discovery Season 4 worked so well for me, because they built this threat of Species 10C, and you realize that this species was not malicious. There was a miscommunication, which is a core principle that Gene Roddenberry really wanted Star Trek to be built around. That's why the motion picture dealt with that very same thing, and the notion of V'ger and the miscommunication with this sentient artificial intelligence. So they brought that into this episode. And in the end, this is the episode, David, that we really needed. We talked about this, I should say, in our last discussion. It came at the absolute perfect time. Moving into the second half of the season, it helped with the overall narrative cohesion because it touched on a little bit of everything that we have been given throughout the last 5 episodes. And that's what we needed. We needed this episode.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Especially coming off of what I feel was I preface by saying I use this term loosely, but the weakest episode of the season with the Spock episode. Again, I liked the episode. The episode was really good, but it was very lackluster. There was just something about it that just felt off.
I also feel like it's just where it was positioned in the show. That's why I say this episode came at a perfect time, because if they had given us another episode that didn't really bring things together, I think there would have been a lot more Star Trek fans sighing at the end of this episode, because we would feel a little bit like we're lost in the midst of a lot of great ideas, whereas nothing's coming together. And that's what this episode fixed, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because now, for me, I actually see a path, an actual physical path that basically Strange New World is traveling.
Yeah.
And, take that into consideration, that I honestly feel that this is where the writing team hit the gas pedal and basically started that uphill acceleration again, and just took the story when it was kind of middling at this point from the last episode and ramped it up, because it said it brought in elements from the past season. It established more character backgrounds. And to me, by the end of it, I feel I understand the series more, because just for me, we've always had questions the past couple episodes. Well, why isn't Pike more established? Why isn't this being told more? With the story that we got in this episode, I now have this idea that we're building towards the inevitable, which is Kirk, Spock, Uhura, the original crew. Because me and you have talked about it couple shows ago now. We kind of speculated that maybe this is how they, quote unquote, reboot the original series.
Yeah, because Captain Kirk seems to be more and more a part of the cast.
And Pike isn't being phased out.
No.
This is the episode that I feel Pike is almost like the steward. He's here to basically make sure we get to the point where Kirk is going to be taking that seat.
He had a relevant part to play.
And it was like, now I understand Anson Mount's point in this one, where it was like, it doubled down on where we left off with Anson Mount and Pike as a character, where it's like Pike is now looking at everyone else's destiny, and he's now kind of like the steward of the Enterprise to make sure it gets to its final destination.
Things happen as they should.
They should.
Because did you see his face when Kirk walked in?
Yes.
It was very much knowing.
It was knowing.
It was a knowing face, yeah.
And it was, instead of of a dread, because you got to also remember that he's already past thinking about the dread of his fate. His main concern at this point is to make sure the destiny of his crew goes beyond him.
Well, it goes back to stoicism, like we talked about a couple
Yeah.
episodes ago, and only fretting over what you can actually control.
Yeah, and that's why when Kirk's here, it's not a dread feeling for Pike. It's almost like getting to the inevitable, which is the goal. The goal is to basically get to the better destiny.
Yeah. Did you also see his face when he noticed that Leanne and Kirk knew each other, or at least Leanne knew Kirk?
Leanne knew Kirk.
He was like, "You motorboating son of a bitch! What's been going on behind my back here?"
Well,
like that face was sheer surprise.
Not only that, I love the fact that we see more relationship of Kirk and his brother.
Dude, we'll get into it. Yes,
oh my god,
it was great.
I was like, oh, this explains a lot of things.
It really does. Okay, so let's get into this. The synopsis of the episode: Uhura seems to be the only one who can hear a strange sound that seems to trigger terrifying hallucinations. The episode was directed by Dan Liu and written by Onitra Johnson and David Reed. Onitra. I believe that's how you pronounce the name. If it isn't, I apologize. Okay, so yes, David, this episode was pretty great in its designs and functions. There's something to be said about parallel narratives. So much ground can be covered when an episode is written like this. Pairing Uhura and Kirk together, pairing Una and Pelia, pairing Pike, or actually having Pike be like kind of what you said, like the steward, kind of the guy that just walks and connects all of the narratives together. Yes. I mean, that is an excellent way to write an episode. But the thing that we're going to talk about first, before we move into all those other aspects, is the pairing of Una and Kirk and what it actually did. It helped not only to assist an understanding or coming to know this version of Uhura, who is at a very much younger age than we had originally met her in the original series, and we learn about her past and how it will eventually shape her. And one specific idea that I know you really like, David, you had to. We haven't talked about it yet, but her inability to face death.
Yes.
It was perfect. It was a perfect theme to use in relation to Kirk. What better character than the one that goes on to cheat death continually, and who has oftentimes has had his own difficulties facing unwinnable situations, something that he proudly wears as a badge of honor in later years.
And it's one of the things that galvanizes the Enterprise crew when Kirk is the captain. They all rally behind him because of, as funny as it sounds, because of his arrogance, because of his cavalier nature,
bravado, his ideological outlook.
They all get behind him.
Yeah.
That's a mark of a good leader. And that's why it's interesting getting to see Kirk kind of in the early stages of, like, he gives the pep talk to Uhura. It doesn't quite hit. It doesn't quite hit because the relationship's not there yet. And both characters are still trying to find themselves. But you see the characteristics. That's why I really appreciate this episode, is like, you can see that everyone in Strange New Worlds understands those legacy characters very well.
They have a deep knowledge of Kirk.
They have a deep knowledge of not just Kirk, Uhura and Spock and all of them. They have a very deep knowledge of all of them.
I don't know about Uhura yet, and I will say the reason why I don't know, because is there any deep knowledge to really understanding Uhura? Because that's unfortunately the cons of the time when the original series was produced. We don't really know Uhura. We've never really come to, like, we know she sings.
Yeah.
We don't really know a whole lot about her personally.
We know that basically, at least through the movies, that out of the whole crew, Uhura is the one that's the most emotional. She's the most emotional out of the entire crew. If something bad happens,
she's more in touch with her feelings.
She is more in touch with her feelings of all the crew, because when something bad happens, especially if you watch the movies and, you know, even some of the older Trek episodes, Uhura is the one that they always snap to when something bad happens. And you can read it in her face that basically it hurts her.
Yeah, that has a lot to do with just the time period.
It does with the time period, but I like
she's the female character, so she's the one that we're going to rely on for her emotional whatever. I can't think of the word.
Connectivity.
Yeah, because they did do that. I remember in the original series a lot. Whenever something like tragic happens, they go to her.
Boom, snap to Uhura. And it's like here, I like they take that trope and they're in a weird sort of way, they're adding to that mythos, that explanation that basically Uhura is the one that's more in touch with feelings and emotions among the whole crew.
Yeah, they're taking the little that we know of her.
Exactly, and accentuating it.
Yes, and making it work with what we do know of her, while also using what we know of Kirk to bring them together and show this future partnership that becomes, legendary in years to come. Because the concept of not liking unwinnable situations, as we know, is rooted in Kirk's belief in the indomitable human spirit and his commitment to finding a way out of seemingly impossible situations. He embodies the never say die attitude and believes in pushing the boundaries of what is achievable, even in the face of insurmountable odds. And all of this was utilized to foreshadow Kirk's command style, but also, and more importantly, because of Strange New Worlds and the core cast and the lead cast, which is Uhura, one of the lead cast members, it's to aid Uhura through her grieving process, because by the very nature of Kirk's being and ideological outlook, several themes are brought to the forefront. Number one, resilience and determination. And these are things that have always been connected to Captain Kirk as a leader and character in Star Trek. A second grouping of themes, leadership and inspiration, which we saw play out in the episode. Uhura was able to rise above her current debilitating state by adopting the Kirk method, I guess you could say, and it solved the mystery that was plaguing her and the crew. It shows you the strength of their future team or future partnerships, I guess you can say, working together. And that's why the ending scene to me was so important as well, to have her, Spock, and Kirk all sit together.
Well, the beautiful thing is, like, we didn't even get the Kirk and Spock introduction till the very end.
You know why I like that?
And I liked it too.
Because it would have been too predictable if they did it at the beginning. It was nice to have it at the end, because as a fan and viewer, you're almost waiting for it. Like, are they going to meet each other?
Yeah.
Like, what's going on? Because when he was on the bridge, Spock wasn't on the bridge.
Yeah.
And I thought that the only connection we'd have between Kirk and Spock was his comment when he was critiquing Spock's chess skills.
Yeah.
Which was good.
I love that point, because it shows that almost like simmering
it's his competitive nature with
Spock, where it's like, oh yeah, your friend over there blew a move a couple of seconds ago.
Yeah.
I'm like going, the fact that he's watching Spock is just like, I'm like going, yeah, that's a Kirk thing to do.
He's competitive. He wants to be the best. There's nothing wrong with that, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, in this modern age, there is some people that push this idea that being competitive and wanting to be the best is sometimes unethical and it's unappealing. It's the mark of toxic masculinity. I disagree with all of that. I feel like there is nothing wrong wanting to be the best, as long as you're not a complete dick.
Exactly.
About it. I think that's embedded in human nature. Isn't that a part of human nature?
Yes.
In a lot of ways.
And
to
that's
be competitive, if you look at the evolutionary process and the idea of the survival of the fittest, these are all things that function together.
Yeah.
Sociologically speaking.
And that's what's important with their portrayal of Captain Kirk right now, or right now Lieutenant Kirk, is like,
oh, he's a captain. He should be.
You see his actions, and you can misconstrue it as "quote unquote" toxic masculinity, but it's also because this is a young captain, or this is a young James T. Kirk right now. He's finding his way to becoming the captain.
There's nothing wrong with arrogance and bravado.
Exactly.
Leanne has arrogance. Do we point a finger at her? She's extremely arrogant in a lot of the things that she does and says.
Or even by like sports standards. Look at sports today. That is filled with arrogance and basically one-upsmanship.
Yeah.
But
fist pumping, pounding of the chest. Yeah.
We look at that as a culture and we applaud that. So in a lot of ways, the way they're portraying Kirk at this point is kind of like that. This is what makes him the team captain. This is what makes him, when it comes down to it, when we finally get the quote unquote ensemble cast that we all know of characters from the original series, we understand this is why Kirk's in the position he's in, because he has that thing that all the rest of the crew will galvanize towards.
Yeah.
And everyone's flaws will be erased because together they will all cover each other. And that's why I really appreciated seeing like you alluded to earlier about like the teaming up of Uhura and Kirk. It was kind of like, yeah, you see little tidbits of that chemistry now. And you're like, as a Star Trek fan, you're like going, okay, you're working up to like what we all will probably all Star Trek fans will hopefully be happy and cry about when they finally see the original crew, you know, on the bridge of the Enterprise. They'll see Spock, Kirk, Uhura, hopefully Sulu and Chekhov and Scotty, and we'll all be happy. The world will be once again whole.
We'll see. I do want to take some time before we get there, because I do want the Strange New Worlds crew to have their moment.
The only
I'm not in a hurry to get there. I don't mind what they're doing with Kirk. It feels right. How they're doing it feels right.
I want to ask you about this, because one of the notes that I had for this pertaining to Pike is how long can we draw out this inevitability that we're going towards?
Well,
which
technically
it has
8 years.
To go 8 years, right?
I believe I'm not sure how much time has passed between Discovery season 2 and Strange Worlds season 1. I don't think a whole lot of time has passed. So I want to say 8 years.
Okay.
Until the incident that renders him disfigured and handicapped, essentially. Yeah.
But like,
I should just say this, interject for a second here, Dave. We say a lot that he dies.
He doesn't die.
We got called out by a couple listeners. Why do you guys always say he dies? I'm like, listen to the whole show and you realize that we say he dies, but then we say he got disfigured. We're all over the place. The idea, the point is, I think most people could understand, he's removed.
He's removed. And I'm sorry, Pike goes on.
He might as well be dead. I mean,
might as well be dead at that point.
The poor dude can't speak. He looks like melted Tupperware.
And essentially, he's going to be forced into a dreamlike state that is going to be his heaven, essentially.
Oh my God. I do hope we get, no matter how sad it'll be, the ending of the show, it has to be a philosophical statement on the idea of living your life
in a dream. Yeah. And that's the thing.
Am I right though? Don't you? Doesn't that have to be? That has to be how they end it.
Oh, absolutely. Because I still say the one thing that haunts me to this day as a Star Trek fan is the final scene from the cage is where they all see him on the viewer screen. They see Pike and he's not in his chair anymore and he's just waving by and he goes underground. And I'm like going, technically all that we're seeing is false.
Yeah.
He's being brought underground by the aliens and being taken care of. That's well and good. But to Pike, he's back to himself when he's not. So it's a lie.
Yeah, it goes. You can really see some Cartesian philosophy being used for that. Yeah. All right. So let's bring it back to this specific episode. And I want to switch gears just a bit. Still keeping with Kirk. The moment with Anne and Kirk.
Did that make you tear up?
Well, a couple of things. So first, let's talk about the family aspect when she gets them to talk about his family. The idea that his father was never around, I mean, though that was an obvious emotional wound, it played true to Kirk's characterization because he used his absence. The idea that Kirk uses his father's absence and his mother's reason for said absence as motivation and personal growth is so on par with Kirk. if he's helping people who really needed, who are in need. What was the line? What was the line? If he's helping people who are in need rather than being with his family, then it must be important.
It must be important.
And that was his deciding factor to become a part of Starfleet. How powerful is that? That is such an illuminating aspect to Kirk's entire personality, characterization, who he is as a person, because these are things we have never had the chance to see when it comes to Kirk. But when you really start analyzing the Kirk mythos, you can really start to see how that idea does, in a lot of ways, serve as a proper framework for who Kirk becomes.
He becomes a really complex character. Everyone, thinks of him as a stereotypical character, but Kirk in himself is a very complex character. That's why I love that scene, because you see it as that way, right? Where it's like, yes, he's using that as motivation and everything else, but then like you can also see it as him still dealing with.
What does he say, David? I choose to face my pain, which is also a big theme in this episode, facing your pain. And then you have that moment in Star Trek V where he says, I need my pain.
I need my pain. Then.
This is an example of that. This pain of the way he perceives his father's abandonment, which he understands as an adult, it wasn't, but he uses that pain from being an adolescent and takes it as a strength.
And then if you take that adage, Mike, think about this, how much more complicated this gets. With that adage of what he says. And then later on, as Star Trek fans, we know how he treats his son, David. Mm-hmm. It brings it all into perspective.
Yeah.
This is who Kirk is. This is why he was more or less, he copied his father because he thought, this is how I succeed. This is how I'm going to let David succeed. And
also he was respecting Carol Marx's wishes.
He was respecting Carol Marx's wishes, but in a lot of ways.
But the unsaid in that movie is very much what you're saying,
and that's what I love about. That's what I love about Star Trek so much, is like the unsaid.
That's why Star Trek is some of the best, because it's about the unsaid.
It's about the unsaid.
Yeah. And also, David, in some respects, these feelings of abandonment could be the very reason he searched for family in his crew.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially if you see the relationship with him and Sam,
which is very, it's a bit of like sibling rivalry, right?
Is. Oh no, it is.
But it also we're seeing the beginnings of possibly why, retrospectively, they're fixing one of the biggest sore thumbs in the original series. And that's when Kirk's brother dies, and Kirk acknowledges it with a shrug. And then the episode moves on.
Yeah.
There is no moment of him thinking about the loss of his brother. There's no grieving process. That's the word I was looking for. There's no grieving process. And perhaps this is the first step in breaking their relationship further, showing that they're at odds because his brother can't get over the fact that Kirk is an overachiever.
And he's a pain in the ass.
And that his father, he's jealous because his father potentially views Kirk as the son that's doing the right thing.
And then you throw it around, and basically you start to actually, and this is what I love about the unsaid in Star Trek, you start throwing it around in your head and you begin to realize, toss that with the adage that Kirk's mentality is space is a dangerous place. So he's already come to that point where he's understanding, if stuff happens in space while they're Federation officers, it's acceptable. You have to accept it. And like that in itself says a lot about Kirk and how it molds his relationship with his family, and why the relationship he gets with the crew of the Enterprise is so different. It's so complex because it challenges his own ideals of what he thinks is right. Space is a dangerous place. I understand that my brother put his life on the line, and he sacrificed and died in the process. I will get over that. But then when it comes to Spock, when it comes to the death of Spock, it shatters him because
That's his brother.
that's his brother. That's to
McCoy
him.
is his brother.
McCoy's his brother.
Doesn't those relationships, like, this is why I like this episode, because it takes everything we know about Kirk's relationships with his crew, but specifically McCoy and Spock,
Yes.
and it justifies it and explains why he finds brothers in his crew like McCoy and Spock, because there's something getting in the way in between his ability to strengthen his relationship with his actual biological brother.
Biological brother.
So I do feel like this is the beginning of that. In order for it to really come to a head and become more clear, they do need to continue to progress that aspect without making us hate Sam.
Oh, yeah.
Because I feel like they did a good job showing Sam's own insecurities without making him look like a D-bag, while also pushing the idea of Kirk and his need for family and searching for that family within his crew. That they did it just fine. But I feel like over the next several seasons, they should continue to give us those moments so that when we get to that original series episode, everything becomes a little bit more clear. But that being said, David, this is the strength of the episode, because you can tell that the writers had a deep understanding of James T. Kirk. And this is the first time, David, we actually were given the real James T. Kirk in Strange New Worlds, which is also a nice icing on the cake. And that's why they needed to nail it. With the other versions of Kirk, I don't think they needed to be perfect characterizations of Kirk, because they were obvious different versions, right? So if they didn't get it perfectly right, it didn't matter. If they didn't cross all their T's and dot all their I's, no one's going to get upset. But now that this is the prime timeline Kirk, you have to get it right. And they knocked it out the park.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you brought up Leanne and Kirk's little thing. I like it.
I liked it. I
like this. Like I said before, David, I like those relationships that have obstacles.
You like tragedies.
I do. I like sadness.
You like sadness.
And the fact that Leanne obviously feels connected to Kirk, and she doesn't know how to say anything to him without coming off as a complete lunatic. Yeah. So I love what they're doing between the two of them. I hope they continue with that, but don't do what you did with Nurse Chapel and Spock. Even though it's okay, play around a little longer with it, because I do feel like they should have done that with Chapel and Spock. And I'm a fan of the foreplay, Dave. That's when it comes to television relationships, I like the foreplay. I like working up to the relationship. But once you get to that relationship, many times even though we think we want it, many times the viewers don't want it. Because how often do we see relationships finally happen in TV shows and then it doesn't work?
The chase is so much better than the actual goal. The chase is actually so much better.
You get where I'm coming from.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because that's why I thought it was hilarious with the Chapel. The little bit of Chapel and Spock we did get to follow up from the next episode was essentially them coming together and saying, "Okay, we understand each other's feelings. Let's just take it week by week." And I was like, "Okay, so they're gonna ball tickle us for." Pretty much for the rest of time now. And now we understand why Chapel and Spock are the way they are.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the thing. I agree with you. I don't want to see that for Leanne, especially of how dramatic that story was. Because it was a very tragic ending for her.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a second. We do need to take a quick break. It's something we have not been doing on our shows, and we do need to get back to it. We'll be right back. All right, so people watching on YouTube, don't worry, there is no break. All right, Dave, so continue your thought. You were getting into Spock and Nurse Chapel.
Well, with Spock and Nurse Chapel, that's why I 100% agree with you that I don't want to see the same thing with Leanne, where it's like the dramatic tone that was left off with Leanne, where she was just shattered. She fell in love with this guy that now does not know who she is, and she is not allowed to tell him anything.
There was a moment that seemed like she might have, like she was going to.
Yeah. But Leanne understands that basically Leanne understands that basically doing anything out of the temporal thing could tempera.
David, you need to start correcting me when I say wrong words because I do playback I do it for critique reasons. I listen to our show off and on to see where we mess up and where we can improve. And I notice that I'll mess up words. I'm like, where's my backup? Where's my backup?
I just let you do what you want.
No,
I get it.
No, dude. There was a few times where I messed up really bad. Like, what the fuck word is that?
It's like, I know what he was saying. I understand where he is.
No, you need to interrupt me.
But like,
please, help me not look so stupid.
That's why I wanted to ask you, are we going to see the end of this story? How does this end for Leanne? Leanne. How does it end for Leanne? Because like, okay, we know that she's not part of the original crew.
We know that, but also there's a lot of wiggle room there because there's so much history we didn't see, Dave. When you go from the original series to the motion picture, how many years passed chronologically speaking in universe?
How many beds did Captain Kirk sleep in?
So you think of the time from the original series to Star Trek II. He had a son. We didn't see any of that. We didn't see his relationship with Dr. Marks.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of time to do things. That's why I believe it's only a matter of time before it may be 5 years, it may be 8 years, it may be 10 years. It's only a matter of time before we see.
Oh God, dude! Once they actually
a not a remake, but a reboot of sorts,
a retelling
of the original series.
Once they get to the point where they introduce Carol Marks, holy crap, that's going to be really messy.
What was the idea that they had before the motion picture for Star Trek? Remember we talked about this? They were creating a network specifically for the new Star Trek series.
Yeah.
It was going to be a continuation of the original series with a lot of changes.
It was going to actually have different characters in positions.
Yeah.
Like, I believe that the original cast, there was going to be a brand new Vulcan character that was going to be introduced. I forgot what the character's name was. And I know that hardcore Star Trek fans are yelling at me, but essentially with that idea that Gene Roddenberry had pre the Next Generation was to try to actually continue on the story of the Enterprise, which is hilarious nowadays because now you see like where Paramount is.
Star Trek Phase 2.
Yeah.
That's what it was called.
Star Trek Phase 2. When you look at what Paramount's doing right now, you could kind of make the argument that they're doing a Star Trek Phase 2.
Kind of feels that way, or at least they can work towards that. How awesome would that be if they actually eventually get us to that original 1970s concept? Now, the details for Star Trek Phase 2, I will share them because there may be listeners out there who were unaware of this. There was an unproduced series called Star Trek Phase 2. It was intended to be a direct continuation of the original series and was initially developed in the late 1970s. The concept for Star Trek Phase 2 emerged after the success of Star Trek The Motion Picture, which was released in 1979. I believe that's incorrect. I don't think it emerged after the success. It actually preceded the motion picture, and the motion picture
came out
because of Star Trek Phase 2's failure to get produced. In fact, I believe they took a lot of the development of Phase 2 and tried to utilize it in some way for the motion picture.
Yeah.
If I'm incorrect, please, listeners out there, feel free to reach out to me and let me know. But I believe that was the gist of it.
Well, if I'm not,
but if they work towards that though,
yeah,
that would be pretty cool.
I think so, because if I'm not correct, it was Phase 2 was supposed to explain that there was a brand new captain. Like Kirk was gone by that point. And then we would see what was the captain's name in motion picture? Decker. We were going to see Decker.
Yeah, wasn't he supposed to be the
Phase 2?
Phase 2 captain?
Yeah, he was going to be Phase 2 captain. So it would have been interesting. I would have really enjoyed to actually see how we got there, because if you think about it, just like by canon standards, we go from the original series to the motion picture. And when you watch the motion picture, if you watch the entire original series, it is such a jarring change, because like all the characters are in different places than you'd think. Spock is not on the Enterprise. He has decided to follow the Kolinar and basically go back to Vulcan. Kirk is not the captain anymore. He's the admiral.
What if we find out the reason why he decided to pursue the Kolinar was because his relationship with Nurse Chapel fell apart?
Oh my god, dude, that would be sad.
How fucking emotional would that be?
Why do you like sad things, Mike?
Why are we not writing Star Trek?
Why do you like sad things?
Tell me that wouldn't be awesome, though. The reason why he decided to go through with purging all of his emotions was because of the failure of that relationship. It was too much for him to take. How fucking great would that be?
Oh my god, dude, that'd be amazing. And it would put the moment when Chapel sees him on the motion picture, and it's that sad look
because he ignores her. Basically, that would make so much sense. Wow, David.
Wow,
we need that ASAP now.
And dude, it would explain why Chapel is not in any of the other movies afterwards, because she would have left. That could have forced her to leave leave Starfleet.
Well, she became Deanna Troy's mother later.
Oh,
so
yeah.
stupid.
That is true. Magically.
Yeah. So going back to some of the moments that made this episode so great, you had touched on it, the Spock and Chapel stuff. That it wasn't a whole lot there, but that's why this episode was good, in my opinion. It was because even though it wasn't a major focus, they still gave us just enough to remind us of what's going on in the background. And then you had the Pelia and Una stuff, which were great. I love the oddball characters. I've always Barclay. Who's the other oddball character? Garrick, I think, is a little out there, eccentric.
The doctor from the Voyager.
The doctor from Voyager. You also have the comedian in Discovery that I like a lot as well.
I can't remember his name.
No, her name. Well, what's
Yeah, it's the engineer. I can't.
Nataro.
Yes.
It's the comedian Nataro. I forgot who she plays now in Star Trek Discovery. I forgot her name. But that's why I like her character a lot, too, because I love the eccentric, sometimes cantankerous characters. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, that's probably the best way to say it, because Pelia fits that to a T, dude. She's won me over. It took me a while, because like when they first introduced her, I'm like going,
Reno.
Oh, Janet Reno.
Yeah.
And like when they introduced Pelia, I kind of was like, we gave the sideways glance. Why is this character here? Okay. But it's amazing. Just like Hemmer from season 1, Pelia has turned into my favorite character because of how quirky she is. How essentially they threw the idea that there's an alien race that we have never seen before that is immortal, that lives on Earth during this time and has just been living this whole time without actually being, known in Star Trek lore.
You know what's funny is that the way they are presenting her character, it actually makes sense if you were someone who could think of an old person, in their 80s, 90s, who just doesn't give a shit. Like, whatever. I'm going to say what I want to say. I've lived my life. I'm jaded. I've been through all this bullshit before. That's pretty much who Pelia is. She's just this person who's been around for so fucking long. She's had enough.
Yeah, and she doesn't want to be told what to do because she's already lived so long.
Yeah.
That it's like when Una comes around and starts arguing with her, it's like, I'm like going, Una, you have no idea who you're arguing with.
I laughed so hard when Una was like, look at your uniform. What are those, crumbs? Did you have time to eat? I actually laughed out loud, which I don't do a lot when I'm watching shows. That there's something about the way she delivered that line. At the same time, they framed Pelia with her disgusting uniform. It was good.
And I'm sorry, Pelia at this point would be an absolute awesome addition to Lower Decks.
Oh, why do you always go back to Lower Decks?
Because Lower Decks
is
is
not
amazing.
the end all, David. Come
Lower
on.
Decks is amazing. That's the end game.
Lower
That is
Decks
the
is fun. It's
That is
fun.
the end game, Mike. That is the end game.
Not everything needs to go back to Lower Decks. All right, so this does bring us to the end of our show. Final thoughts, Dave. Go ahead.
Final thoughts on this one. Definitely a stronger rebound from the last episode. I gave the last episode around an 80, 86, I think. But this one was a strong rebound. I think that this one is a 90 for me. I really liked every single element in here that they introduced. And now I'm more comfortable saying I know what the thorough line is. Because remember, last episode we were told we don't know what the thorough line is. What the hell is the point of Pike? What is the story that we're going for? Now I can fully say no. The thorough line is we are gearing up to see Captain Kirk, Spock, Uhura, the original crew, take control of the Enterprise, and Pike is the steward. He's going to make sure this happens.
So you're thinking that the show's slowly going to put pieces into place.
I think pieces are going to be slowly put into place. That's why I asked you
I'm
earlier.
okay with that idea, Dave, because it only makes sense that we work towards the future we know is coming.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do feel like this is a show called Strange New Worlds, and our core cast, they do need to be our core cast.
Yes.
Now, what they're doing with Kirk so far is just fine, but if they continue to go in that direction, they have to be careful because they might as well just create another spinoff. Let this show be its own,
Oh, yeah.
at least for the time being, and slowly drop those pieces.
Yeah, that's why earlier I asked you how long can we accept, seeing the story of Pike being the steward. Do we say another season? Do we say 2 seasons?
Yeah.
Do we say 3 seasons?
Oh, I think we can. I think we have a long time with this crew.
I think we can. I think we can pull it off.
If anything, they can go the more traditional 7 seasons, which I hope they do, because if they do 5 seasons like they're doing with Discovery, that means we're going to have 50 episodes of Strange New Worlds. That's fucking bullshit.
Well, I'm definitely worried about and this is outside of Star Trek. I'm definitely worried about the state of Paramount, the way they do their series nowadays, because we might be stuck only getting 5, 6 seasons.
This is what's going to happen, Dave. I'm going to call it out now since we have a few extra minutes here. If Paramount Plus cannot get their shit together, they're going to go back to their original plan and strategy, which was to release Star Trek on regular network television. The point I'm trying to make is that in order for Star Trek to have a real future, because when you start looking at these numbers, it isn't sustainable to keep all these shows going. That's why it makes sense. Unfortunately, it does make sense why they canceled Prodigy, why they are bringing Discovery to an end, and why they are keeping episodes down to 10.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to save money.
Yeah.
But the thing is that I feel like this show will suffer in the long run. Strange New Worlds. No matter how great the writing is, I do feel like this specific format will inherently hurt the end product of Strange New Worlds because of its limited episode count.
Yeah.
They need to boost it up. And the only way they can do it currently, financially speaking, is by releasing the seasons on regular network television, perhaps later, like they were doing with Discovery. If you remember, that's what they did with Discovery's first and second season during the pandemic.
And they saw huge uptick numbers.
They did. That's what they need to do. They need to release Star Trek, maybe 2 years delayed if you want, so you can still bring people into your streaming services, or bypass streaming completely and put your shows on regular network television. And this isn't like Discovery season 1 that had mature ratings that you couldn't put on regular TV. There's no censorship needed. You have a show that's relatively, I would say, TV 14 when it comes to content, right?
Yeah.
You can repurpose these shows or produce Star Trek once again on regular network television. I don't really want to see it go to network television because I feel like some overall quality will be lost in terms of production, because television on network TV is far more factory
Yeah, there's almost like almost you take a back step.
Yeah, but I feel like they can split the difference. They can find a better way to make these shows work. But if you want Star Trek to have a future, this is the problem I see. You're not going to create a future for Star Trek with 2 million people watching your episodes.
Exactly.
You're not. This is why we need movies. I'm going right back to that. I've said this so many fucking times, David. Movies is what will keep your franchise alive ultimately.
Yes.
And that's why they need to focus on that, because you can reach countless millions of people when it comes to movies that will then say, you know what? I went to go see a movie with my Uncle Jones during a summer vacation. That Star Trek film was pretty great. What else is there when it comes to Star Trek? That is how franchises like Star Wars and Star Trek and Harry Potter and all the biggest IPs have managed to survive. It's because of those tentpole pictures. And that's what they need to do with Star Trek, because the streaming services is not the end all or answer to longevity when it comes to Star Trek. It's great for now, but eventually they're going to have to find something that really breaks through to the mainstream in a really big way. And it's a shame that more people aren't watching these shows.
It is.
Especially when you watch an episode like this, which I'm going to give a 95%. I think this is the best episode of the season, hands down.
Ooh, that's... wait.
It's the best, Dave. Like, content-wise, maybe not.
The Kirkland and episode.
That's what I was about to say. Content-wise, I believe that was episode 3. Might be the better in terms of content. In terms of writing, this is a far better episode in the ways of writing and how much ground they covered. They covered a lot of ground and connected a lot of pieces.
That is true.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.